All right, we continue our special coverage of President Biden's visit to Ottawa. Both the president and the prime minister addressed Parliament this afternoon. So what were the key takeaways, and where does the relationship stand as we come to the end of this trip? Roland Paris is former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Laura Dawson is a former senior economic advisor to the U.S. Embassy in Canada, also the executive director of the Future Borders Coalition. Thank you both for joining me.
You're welcome.
Roland Paris, I'd like to start with you. What were the standout moments from the leaders today, in your view?
Well, the speech was just extraordinary. You know, this was, to call it a positive speech from Joe Biden is an understatement. There wasn't a hint of any criticism. This was absolutely a Valentine covered with kisses for Canada. So who couldn't like that? Of course, you know, the substance, as you've been discussing on your show, having the President of the United States talking about building and buying North America as opposed to America first or Buy American, that's critically important. And that's not going to be a one-time deal. He is one important man in the U.S. political system. We don't know how long he's going to be around for. This is going to be a kind of fight for Canada for a very long time, but it's so encouraging to hear the president speaking in those terms. It shows that he's been socialized into those terms, or at least he comes to Canada with that kind of recognition. Yeah,
Laura, the tone was remarkably different. I mean, it shows what a difference Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania can make, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a really warm, embracing speech, as Roland said. Canada, the Prime Minister's office really couldn't have asked for more in terms of tone and shared values and hitting all the right points. Everything from the hockey to the women to the two Michaels. It was designed to grab at the heartstrings. In terms of substance, there was a little less than one might have wanted. For me, one of the real standouts was not so much Joe Biden, but everyone else that was with him. It was a star-studded entourage that included the Secretary of State, Secretary of Energy, advisors on Homeland Security, national security, economic security. It was quite a cast that indicated to me that they're serious about re-engaging with Canada.
Yeah, the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, and I have to say this for the people back home. Her mom is a Dowden who grew up on Newtown Road in St. John's, Newfoundland. So I have to say that for my people. But you know, Laura, the reassurance from the president on the Buy America stuff, really making it a Buy North America, right? And offering that reassurance and saying it'll be that way sort of as long as I'm president, as Roland pointed out. That should light a fire under Canada, should it not, to lock in the infrastructure and mining programs and the processing facilities that will be part of this Buy North American system before any potential change in president. Shouldn't that be the message, do you think?
I'm going to be a little more cynical. Okay. I'm going to say what he says abroad and what he says at home are two different things, and that Buy America is a very, very compelling political slogan in the United States. And while Canada is a good neighbor, Canada does not vote in U.S. elections. I think in the sectors that they pointed out, electric vehicles, critical minerals, semiconductors, I think things are all very good there. But if you're not in those industries, then there's still a fair amount of uncertainty as to certain elements of the U.S.-Canada supply chain.
Right. Roland, what do you make of that? I mean, there are two different audiences, right? Like, it's easy to say one thing in Canada versus what you say, you know, in the Rust Belt in the U.S.
Well, listen, I mean, he ran on Buy American. Yeah. You know, he campaigned with gigantic signs that said Buy American behind him. So he's not going to abandon the Buy American message. The question is, and this has been the task of the Canadian Embassy in Washington and the Canadian government and any number of Canadian interlocutors, to make the point that in order to achieve the kind of economic security goals that the United States is trying to achieve in these new technologies or with critical supply chains and minerals, that you have to work with Canada and Canada's a willing partner. So now that argument carried the day with the electric vehicle tax credits. And what was interesting today was the extent to which Joe Biden was using that language without actually kind of underlining it by America. He was just part of his discourse. Yeah. So this was like a day-long briefing session for him, really breathing life into this. And the Prime Minister gave quite a long speech before Joe Biden's speech, basically making the point about the interconnectedness of all of these things.
Yeah, and Laura, one of the issues where Joe Biden, I think, didn't get what he wanted was on Haiti, right? That they were looking for Canada to take this leadership role and lead the security force. They got $100 million for police training and police support, but it seems like Canada's just not going to do this. That's pretty clear. I mean, does this change the relationship in any way? Joe Biden was asked about it. If he was disappointed, he said no, and he understands it's complex. How does it play in Washington?
I don't think that. I mean, the two sides were very clear in their positions. I think it made sense for the U.S. to make the request. I think Canada was able to make a case that it didn't have the resources available to launch the kind of force that the U.S. was requesting. Moreover, this isn't a military intervention as much as trying to control a very dynamic situation of really gang conflict and gang violence. So I think Canada was able to come up with a package of stabilizers that would satisfy the U.S. and a lot of joint work. And the U.S. recognizes that Canada has some advantages in the Caribbean among Francophone countries that the U.S. just simply doesn't have.
Roland, how do you think that plays, what they offer today, Canada?
Well, clearly it played enough that the president wasn't willing to, hint at any discomfort with the position of Canada. It was the spending, but also the commitment to take 15,000 migrants over the course of the year. I think that the Americans initially probably didn't put that much thought into it. Like, we have a problem with Haiti. Maybe the Canadians can deal with it. They speak French. They have a connection. They can organize something. And the position of the Canadian government was, what exactly are we talking about here? And I can say that because in my main job as an academic, as opposed to a political pundit, in my main job as an academic, I spent 20 years looking at stabilization missions. It's a lot easier to get in than to get out, and a lot of missions start without a clear plan. So I think the outcome here is not bad from Canada's perspective.
Laura, were you surprised by the agreement on the Safe Third Country agreement changes to apply it across the whole border, close Roxham Road, and the trade-off being that Canada takes 15,000 migrants that presumably would otherwise show up at the U.S. southern border? I can see the political value of that here. Is that a big win for Biden?
It's not a huge win for Biden, actually. It is a huge win for the relationship. There's nobody on either. Majority on either side don't disagree with this. No one wants to see queue jumping. No one wants to see a violation of rule of law. Would like to have more orderly processes and a better way to deal with asylum seekers. But I was really skeptical that the U.S. was going to take this on, simply because it was a thorny, devilish, lawyerly agreement that required all sorts of conversations and bilateral meetings. And we haven't seen much of an appetite among the Americans for that kind of deep, detail-oriented work. So the fact that they went ahead and did this, they figured out, some kind of parity. I don't know whether 15,000 migrants versus closing the hole between border posts, how that works out. But it's important because the U.S. cared enough to engage with Canada on this. Secondly, I hope it is a sign that the U.S. and Canada are going to engage in a very serious way on helping to manage asylum seeking, the migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere and beyond, not just in putting a cap on the bottle at Roxham Road and the northern border, but helping to manage some of the push factors, asylum management, et cetera, that we're all facing as North Americans.
Roland, the U.S. seems to have this persistent anxiety over our level of defense spending. That's been exacerbated, of course, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and with everything that's happening there. The money on NORAD, and it appears to be an acceleration of getting infrastructure ready for the F-35s. I mean, do you think this, what do you make of that move? Do you think this will satisfy the Americans?
Well, just a quick word on Roxham Road. I mean, I think, I think that the president, there's no question that Laura's right. There were a lot of different bureaucratic barriers, regulatory barriers. It seems clear the president pushed this over the finish line in anticipation of this meeting, and he didn't have much to gain from this politically at home. So it seems consistent with him wanting this meeting to be a success. With regard to the military spending, we have a lot more to do. Talking about the acceleration of the part of the commitment on the NORAD commitment, you know, we're very far away from where we need to be, considering the way the world is changing and considering what we are going to need as an insurance policy in our defense and security capabilities for this world. And that includes in the Arctic. This is not just responding to the Americans saying, spend more on defense. How little can we spend in order to get get the Americans off our back? What do we need and want? And we're far from what we need. And there'll be a NATO summit in Vilnius in July, and it'll be tough to be at near the bottom of the list if that's where we are in terms of defense spending.
Laura, how your quick thoughts on the defense stuff today?
I was impressed with the focus on NORAD. I think the focus on NORAD, the focus on the Arctic, is really key. Again, both have paid lip service and made some commitments to how they're going to modernize NORAD, but are they actually going to put money and resources to the modernization that's required, especially according to a relatively quick time horizon?
Yeah, we'll find out maybe more in the budget. Can I ask you one Barbara Walters question before it's a how do you feel question? The moment with Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, right? Like, I covered that a lot. I was live on the air the night we found out they were coming home. And I know they've understandably kept a low profile. But Roland, I mean, what were you thinking when you saw them there and the president gave them a standing ovation? You know,
that was the most powerful moment of the whole day. And even more powerful than the president giving them a standing ovation, acknowledging the price they paid for being pawns in this struggle, which was so important and meaningful. Even more impressive was the spontaneous standing ovation and rousing standing ovation they got before the president and the prime minister even walked in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
It was incredibly touching. I'm so happy for those two men that they were able to experience that. I hope that it helps them in their continued recovery from this experience.
Yeah, Laura, what was that moment like for you when you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, first, substantively, it was a reminder that the U.S. and Canada can work together to do hard things. And this was truly a hard thing that required best efforts on both countries. But as Roland points out, while the standing ovation during the formal part of the presentation was great, those moments before when the two Michaels got the standing ovation, and I don't know if you saw it before even, but Michael Kovrig was spending some time with Jean Chrétien, and it was Jean Chrétien and Joe Clark sitting side by side, and Michael and Mr. Chrétien's faces were about 6 inches apart, and there was a lot of meaningful communication going on. I wish I could have heard what they were saying, because it was just really heartrending to see the connection between those two men.
Well, as it happens, the Newfoundland and Labrador Health Minister was sitting right there behind that, and I texted with him, and he said they thanked Mr. Chrétien for what he did for them to try to help get them out because of his, I mean, connections with China are not a good thing right now, but at the point of that, it was is something
You've
that
got people everywhere.
Listen, there's a Newfoundlander in the middle of everything. So there you go. That was some of the conversation that happened there. Look, I want to thank you all. Laura Dawson, Roland Paris, thanks so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
All right.